Achieve a unified theory of complex systems? Can science achieve a unified theory of complex systems? Can science achieve a unified theory of complex systems? Can science...
In 1991, I was awarded my PhD for a thesis called Cricket, Class and Colonialism, coming straight at you from the history of sport. Times were tough though, and there were barely any jobs in universities for a budding historian of sport. Working in a bookshop, getting bored, I decided to retrain and become a computer programmer. But by the time I'd finished doing the course, the biggest recession in the IT industry was underway. At that moment, someone from the Wellcome Unit for the History of Medicine at Glasgow called me. They needed a researcher for a project on the medical profession, a historian that could also build a database. So I took the job, didn't really have much choice. At first, I hated the history of medicine as a subdiscipline. It seemed like a clique funded by the extremely wealthy Wellcome Trust. And what was so important about medicine anyway? However, it didn't take me long to get over this, aside from a job being a job, which, by the way, can't be overrated in the academy today. I really started to see that biomedicine was one of the most important forces that shape the world and how we think and feel about ourselves. And if that was the case today, it must have been so yesterday and the day before that as well. The one piece that really turned me on to medical history was Nick Jewson's Disappearance of the Sick Man from Medical Cosmology. This tour de force, published in 1976, had become one of the staples of the history of medicine, the sort of article that if it wasn't cited in something else, you had to ask yourself, why wasn't it? By now, many of you will be familiar with the argument, and if you're not, then it'll probably be intuitive. Sometime around the end of the 18th century, about the time when Pinel was allegedly unshackling the insane women at the Salpêtrière, a new form of knowing the body and mind in sickness and health emerged, which was more concerned with disease than it was with patients. The techniques of pathological anatomy relied upon the correlation of symptoms observed before death with the lesions found in the inner crevices of the cadaver post-mortem. Essentially, Jewson argued, pathological anatomy reduced the sick person to a set of symptoms, or even the organ which was being destroyed by the natural forces of disease. This was an argument designed to show that biomedicine, as it was experienced by patients in the 1970s, and many would say the 2010s, was scientific, reductionist, and concerned more with pathology than with the person. Medicine, Jewson and others argues, had become ultra-reductive. I can't even begin to convey to you how exciting I found this. It was political, it was sociological, it really said something about the way we live now. But there were also things that nagged me. I was then, as I am now, an avid reader. I believe it's one of the best ways to learn about what this whole living and being human business is about. And while I was consuming Jewson, I was also devouring Walkie Collins. Now, Collins as a writer was similar to Dickens, only not as good, or maybe he was similar to Bulwer Lytton of Dark and Stormy Night fame, only a lot better. But unlike both, he wrote about really dangerous stuff. Now, Dickens was whimsy with a dark edge. Bulwer Lytton was a romantic with bad style. Collins just seemed plain perverse. For his books are full of inversion. The Woman in White, perhaps his most famous tome, has men who behave like women, women who behave like men, people pretending to be other people, and all of them teetering on the precipice of a nervous breakdown. Bearing in mind that this novel was published in the late 1850s, it seemed we were dealing with very ill people whose mental states were affecting their physical states and whose physical states were affecting their mental states. And more than that, they were quite definitely whole people who had not been bio-reduced to a cluster of symptoms. So there we go. 50 years or more from the advent of the pathological anatomical method, there were still sick men, sick women, and sick children. So, My curiosity was piqued. How could this be the case? Was it simply that the rest of the world had not caught up with medicine? Jewson's thesis would demand that. But no! The more I read, the more I realised the medical practitioners at the time that Collins was writing were thinking the same way. The sick person had not disappeared, and arguably she never would. It was at this point that I realised that the major problem for the Jewson thesis was that it relied too heavily on pathology, the study of the way a disease progresses through the body, and anatomy, the understanding and analysis of the structure and function of the body. The areas Jewson had not focused upon were etiology, the cause of disease, and therapy. Now, if he had shifted his focus, and he didn't, because he wasn't inclined to do so, what would he have discovered? I can give you my answer, or rather answers. Medicine never became as scientifically reductive as he thought, because firstly, medicine is a science of humanity, and even the most reductive practitioner cannot avoid contact with the object of his or her study. But whatevs. Secondly, the sub-branches of anatomy and pathology, and also, if we want to be pernickety, prognosis, develop much faster and more effectively than etiology or therapeutics. Following this, thirdly, etiology remained resolutely holistic. Sickness and health were a function of the individual's relationship to their environment in all its facets: place, climate, people, work, love, sex, death, you name it. The human experience impacted upon the state of health of any given person. And finally, given all of this, a yawning gap, a therapeutic gap, opened between cause and treatment that would not, could not be filled by either pathology or anatomy. Put this way, the whole art, and it was usually described as an art of therapy, was speculative, based upon incomplete understandings of every other branch of medical knowledge. To clarify, if X causes the body to do Y, then removing X or attacking Y will result in the body being restored to health. But what then if either or even both X and Y were speculative? In other words, while we think we know of what X and or Y consists, in reality, in the universe that only a putative God could see, we're actually pig ignorant, about one or both. Then any therapy that we base upon X and or Y is done so on an entirely speculative basis. This is a too long introduction to this lecture and the next. But put bluntly, for much of the last 200 years, biomedicine has flirted with speculation, and it still does. But no part of biomedicine has flirted more. We might even invent the verb to tinder to describe this. Has tindered more than psychiatry. We're about to enter a world where people say they know what is happening, but in reality they do not. Frequently, we don't know what causes a particular psychiatric condition, but we think we do, so we develop a therapy that counters the cause. And then it appears to be working until it doesn't appear to be working. At this point, you need an illustration. So let's go for one of the big ones in Module 2, depression and the SSRIs.